So, and one thing I wanted to ask of all you is to put your microphones on mute if you're online, and just so there won't be distracting noises. And just so you can see that there are some other people here in the room sitting around. So, all right. So we can just get started now. So here we are with
Father,
Abba
before you
Dorotheus.
begin, maybe
Yes.
we need to give a reminder to everybody to turn off their microphones because there's some background noise.
Yes, please turn off your microphones until and keep them off until you want to start talking or saying something. Yeah. Okay, so Abba Dorotheus, I'm just going to say a few words about Abba Dorotheus. So he lived in the 5th century in Gaza, and he joined the monastery of Abba Dorotheus at a very early age, and the abbot there was Abba Dorotheus, and there are 2 holy elders there, Barsanuphius and John. And so he lived there for many years, about almost 20 years. And then after St. John, one of the others, passed, and also after the Abba Dorotheus passed away, Abba Dorotheus went and made his own monastery. And so what this book is talks that he gave at his new monastery, where he was now the abbot, and he was telling his disciples various things about the spiritual life. And it seems that what this book was, it wasn't something that he didn't sit down and write this word for word, but there was probably some sort of scribe there who was a speed writer who would just write down really fast what he was saying, and then it was all collected into these instructions, these teachings. So so the first chapter, the first instruction is called regarding abandonment of the world, and in it he's talking first about just how his understanding of the world is, how in the beginning God created man, and Adam and Eve fell, as you know, and then because of this fall, we fell not only away from paradise, but also very far away from God himself. And then now I'll refer to page numbers in this edition of the book, which I realize might not be the book you have, but just in case you want to follow along. So on page 28, he talks about in paragraph 5, he talks about how because we've fallen away from God, in order to come back to God, there's 2 things we need to do. First of all, he says we need baptism. We need to be baptized in the Orthodox Church, because this cleanses from all previous sin, but it also opens the door for God's grace to work directly in our soul. And what I mean by that is there was a Saint Diadochos of Photiki who taught that before baptism, the grace of God is working externally on the heart, on the soul, but then after baptism, God's grace enters our heart itself and then works on the inside. And so this is a very significant difference, and it has to do with just how much grace is actually given at baptism. And so that's one thing we definitely need baptism, Orthodox baptism. And then the second thing he says we need is to keep the commandments. And now when we talk about the commandments, he's talking about all the things that Christ gave us in the Gospels. And the reason why we keep the commandments is because this is the path to reconnecting with God. And specifically, the Holy Fathers and Abba Dorotheus talk about the difference between sins and passions. And there's a very important distinction that we should all have very clear in our mind. Just like for the body, we have illnesses and the symptoms of illnesses, and the same thing we have in the soul. So the passions are the passions. And so just like a good doctor would be someone who addresses not just the symptoms, but the underlying illness. The same way we who are working on our soul need to be working on not just just not the symptoms. Let's say I stole something, but also to get to the root of, why am I stealing it? Because I'm prideful, am I greedy, am I jealous, or I want to show off, or whatever it is. And so that's why Saint Abba Dorotheus is talking about the different passions. So at the bottom of page 28, he says, the passions are anger, vanity, sensuality, hatred, evil desires, and such things. So these are the underlying causes. And so our struggle is to overcome these passions, because Abba, an earlier desert father in Egypt, Abba Pimin, he says that the passions are like a brass wall that are between us and God, and they don't let the light, the grace of God to shine on us and to affect our souls. And so it's these passions that the Holy Fathers had their whole emphasis on trying to uproot. And so Abba Dorotheus at the top of page 29 says, it is possible to have passions yet not to act on them. And so what this means is that, let's say I am greedy. I do have the passion of greed, and I see the opportunity to steal something, whether it's extra, so it's money or an item or whatever it is. But I say, no, I'm not gonna, even though I really do want to steal this thing, I'm gonna resist the temptation, and I'm going to resist that temptation. Oh, Vasiliki, I see you have a hand raised. Did you want to say something there?
Thank you, Father. Only that you cut out right when you were saying illness and symptoms. The analogy to sins and versus passions. On my part, I lost that whole statement.
Oh, did other people also lose that? Yeah. Let me redo that. Okay, so what I was saying is that the passions are the illness. The just as we have illnesses of body and symptoms of those illnesses of a bodily illness, the same way we have passions. So we have the passions are the underlying illness of the soul, and the sins are the manifestations of that underlying illness. So if I have the passion of pride, then a manifestation of that will be I'll brag a lot, and that bragging will be the sin, but the illness is actually the pride. And so what we're trying to do is not just stop the sins, but even uproot the passions themselves. And so what Abba Dorotheus is saying, we need to fight against both. And so first of all, he starts out by saying it is possible to have passions yet not to act on them. And so that's pretty much where we all are. We all have these passionate desires, and we're all need to be constantly resisting them. And so here's sort of a question now. So is this this is sort of one person pointed out that this is sort of faking it until you make it kind of thing, where you don't really have these you don't really have the virtue of being humble or loving or chaste or whatever it is, but you fake it until you make it. And so just a question, so at what point is this faking it actually a kind of hypocrisy? Does anybody want to address that question? I mean, is it hypocrisy to pretend to have a virtue that you don't have in order to not fall into sin? Yeah. So it's, you're saying it's dishonest if you're doing it. So do you agree with that it's dishonest to fake it till you make it?
Isn't there places in Scripture where Christ tells us, "Be joyful, be this way. You don't have to feel it, just be it," and then it comes? Is that?
Yeah.
So even though I understand the faking it part, but if we can deny our feelings, we don't want to put too much attention on what we feel. We just want to do the right thing, and then does it become part of virtue?
And by the way, can you all hear what she just said? Because oh, good. Okay, you're on. Yes, and so that is part of it. That we do need to exert ourselves, and so even if we don't feel like doing something, like even like we might feel like depressed or not, we might not feel in the mood to pray, or we not feel like in the mood to being kind to someone, but that doesn't mean that just because I'm not in the mood for it, or just because it's not coming naturally to me, that I should not do it. And so the reason that the time it becomes actually hypocrisy would be when we're trying to pretend to people that this is our natural way, and pretending, perhaps even lying to ourselves, because there is a big difference between being aware that yes, I do have this passion, but I'm not going to give into it, between that and thinking that, oh no, I'm perfectly humble, I have no need, I have no pride at all, and whereas really there is some unseen passion there, or whatever the passion is.
I think it's a step-by-step process at the end of the day. It's a conscious effort, I guess,
Yes.
that people should make to, at the end of the day, get rid of the passion.
Yes.
But until getting rid of the passion, we have to just work.
Yes, it is
And
work.
this is not hypocrisy, it's just work.
Yes. Oh,
But I think acknowledgement of the fault is honesty.
yes.
So when we acknowledge, we are proud, and we fight with it, that's not hypocrisy, because you acknowledge the truth.
Yes.
But if we are pretending we are not, that's what I think what Father is saying. That's
Yes.
where.
And you all heard that online? Okay, good. Yeah. And what are you going to say, Anastasia?
I was gonna question, he says if it's possible to have a passion but not act on it, isn't there like degrees of thoughts though, that just having the thought is sinful in its nature? So like if I'm gonna steal it for that example again, like just the thought, okay, I'm not gonna do it, but isn't just thinking about it not?
Yes, and so yes, that's a good point. So the question is, when there are thoughts about sinning, the question is that very thought in itself a sin? And this is something that it really depends on what degree you're actually giving into the sin. And this is something that Saint John of the Ladder, who lived about 100 years after Abba Dorotheus, he wrote much more about these degrees of giving into a sin. So he says, first there's a provocation. First we have, let's say, the thought to, oh, I'm sorry, something strange just happened online. Okay, so everybody still see me? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so we're getting back to what I was saying. So if we have a thought, let's say, to break the fast, for example, and we choose, and because there's a piece of cheese right there, and it's a Friday, and we're thinking of eating it. So simply the thought to break the fast is not a sin at all. It's just the very first thought that just comes to us, and that comes to really even the saints. They will have these provocations, these assaults of sinful thoughts. But then the question is, what happens after that initial provocation? Do we afterwards start dialoguing with it? And so if we start to ponder this thought, yes, maybe I could eat this. Would that be nice? It would be tasty, but it'd be a sin. So when we start having that sort of inner dialogue, it starts getting into a gray area where it actually could start becoming a sin. But if we actually get to the point of telling ourselves, yeah, that's it. I'm gonna eat that cheese, even if we don't even actually do it, just the fact that we've decided to eat it is that in itself is a sin. And of course, if we actually act on our decision to eat it, that's even worse. We're giving into the sin. So there are these stages of any temptation. First, it comes as an assault, as this initial provocation, and then we start giving into it. And so there's also why the Holy Fathers say that one of the most important virtues is this virtue called watchfulness, nipsis, because if a person is watchful with their thoughts and is able to see the sinful thought coming and recognize it for what it is, then they'll never sin. So they have a saying in the Holy Fathers: perfect watchfulness equals perfect sinlessness. because you'll always see this temptation coming before it gets you. Okay, so were there any more comments on that? Should I move on? Okay, all right. So now on page 30, on section 7, he talks about baptism as also the power to do good, because this is something that we're given through baptism, this extra grace we were talking about that makes it more, we're given extra power, and we're also given a guardian angel so that we can have even more protection and help in our struggle. And then Abba Dorotheus tells us that Christ teaches us by his holy commandments how to be cleansed from the very passions themselves. And so one thing about the commandments that it's very helpful for us to remember is that the commandments that Christ gives us, they're not some arbitrary set of rules that they're just to make our lives miserable, so we can't have fun or do anything we'd like to do. But on the contrary, it's God, Christ, who created us. He knows how we work as human beings, and he knows what's good for us. Mm-hmm. And so he knows that if we don't keep his commandments, then our lives will be miserable. And so, for example, we even take for the commandment, love your enemies. He knows that if we don't love our enemies, even though it's a very difficult thing to do, we'll harbor this inner coldness in our heart. Even if we're loving towards most people, the problem is if we don't love our enemies, well, that cold part of our heart will actually affect the rest of our heart. It will affect the rest of our love for other people, so it's not quite as complete and warm as it could be. And same with all the commandments, like the commandment, do not fornicate, for example. There's very many studies that have shown that if people do fornicate before they're married, they will actually have a much less joy in marriage. They'll have a higher chance of divorce. They'll have less satisfaction in their life. They'll have a lower connection with their spouse, and so many things. And so it's clear that there's a very good reason why Christ gave us all the commandments. Okay, and by the way, and anybody also online, you can just, if you have anything to comment or say, just start talking. You don't need to wait for me to notice you. Okay, and so now just moving on to page 31, where he talks about how pride is really the root of all our problems, and he comments on how Adam and Eve were on page 33. He talks about how Adam and Eve, not only were they prideful and obstinate in insisting on eating the fruit despite not being told not to, but they even after God approached them and said, where are you, and how do you know you're naked if you didn't eat the fruit? And he was just very gently sort of encouraging them to repent, but they were so obstinate and prideful that they couldn't repent, and that's why God had to kick them out of paradise. And so in the same way, we also all have pride, and even the greatest saints still have a little bit of pride, which is why the Holy Fathers would say pride is something that's going to follow us all the way to the grave. In other words, no matter how old and advanced we get, we'll always have pride. And I even remember, like, whenever my elder Ephraim would be in confession and someone would say to him, "Oh, Yarnda, I have pride." Yarnda Ephraim would always say, "Yes, so do I." He would say, and he meant it too. I mean, he's not that, of course, he was a prideful person, but he was able to see that he still had little bits of it in him. And so, yeah, but also pride is something, not only is at the root of all evils, but it's really, I would say, the most ugly of all sins. You can think about people if you know someone, let's say, who's really greedy or a real glutton or whatever it is, no matter what kind of passion he has, it's sort of bearable. When you have someone, you're dealing with someone who's just so egotistical and prideful, it's just so just awful to be around that kind of person. And likewise, the opposite is also true. You know, when you have someone who's gentle, you know, they're very, even this inner state of theirs even affects how they appear. And this is like Saint Silouan talked about, how he would witness people coming to the monastery with their faces disfigured by sin, but then after years of living the spiritual life with humility and prayer and repentance, they would acquire a beautiful face. But then the opposite, he saw there, when he was a layperson, there was a very beautiful young girl who had just a very nice face, but then she started falling into sins, and she lost that beauty, and she became ugly even in the face. And not only is pride the most ugly thing for us to see, but also for God as well. God is someone who he's so repulsed by pride that he would rather have us fall into any other sin rather than pride. And in fact, there are many instances of people who God allowed to fall into some serious sin just so that they would be humbled. And like I mentioned, for those of you who were here in church a few weeks ago, I talked about how there is a very old, a 90-year-old monk who was prideful, but then because he was prideful, he insisted on disobeying, and then he ended up falling into fornication. But God revealed to this monk's elder that his fall was actually a very good thing. It was for his salvation, because by falling, he now had acquired a deep humility. And so it just goes to show that what God wants more than anything in us is our humility. It's for us to have a humble sense about ourselves. So, did anybody want to comment anything, or should I keep talking?
Keep talking, Father.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so then, just moving on to page 34, he's talking about, and 34, he's talking about how our, number 10, how we need to, one of the most powerful ways to fight against pride is through cutting off our self-will for being obedient. And so it's the way our pride is shown most of all, it's through our self-will. It's by doing it our way, or thinking we're right, or knowing we're right and insisting on our own way. And so even though this might be something that most people see as just the natural way to be, is just to have this self-reliance, it is actually a manifestation of our hidden pride. And because it's this kind of pride is this self-will and wanting to do it our way is something so deeply rooted in us. Abba Dorotheus is talking about how the Holy Fathers knew this, and because of that, they devised this idea of monasticism, where it'd be a place where people would be going. It's sort of like a school, where just like you can go to a school to learn whatever it is, a trade, carpentry or plumbing, or whatever, you can go to a school, a school of monasticism, in order to learn how to cut off your will. And so that's what Abba Dorotheus is saying, that the whole point of our monastic life is to learn to cut off our will, because by cutting off our will, we'll gradually learn humility, and then with humility, we'll acquire all the passions and unite with God. And so, of course, I'm speaking to a bunch of people who aren't monastics right now, but that doesn't mean that this path is only open to monastics. It is the idea, this concept of cutting off my will and doing things the way someone else wants is really something anyone can do. It might be a little bit more challenging if you're not in a monastery, but it's definitely something you can do most of the time. So, for example, let's say your spouse says, "Oh, take your extra thick jacket today because it'll be really cold," but you've seen the forecast, you know it's actually not going to be that cold. Well, rather than saying, "No, no, 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 I'm not going to take it. It's warm. I'm warm enough." You could say, "Oh, okay, I'll do it your way," and just simply learning, training yourself in all these little things to do things as someone else asks you. This encourages us and gets us into the habit of not insisting on our will, and that gradually increases our humility. And so the question is, when do we not obey people? And this is something that also the Holy Fathers talked about, because obviously we can't just obey anyone. In fact, when I was a teenager, I started reading these books about the spiritual life and about obedience. I thought, okay, I gotta obey anyone that asks me anything. So one day I was waiting in the subway for my mom to pick me up because I was commuting to college, and so I gave her a call, and she came to the subway station, and when she got there, she couldn't find me anywhere, and then finally she found me. She said, "Hey, where were you? I was looking all over for you." I said, "Oh, I'm trying to find some cigarettes." I said, "What?" Because I'm not someone who smoke. I don't know smoke. I said, yeah. There's this homeless guy who wanted me. I asked him if he was cold and he needed anything, and he said, "Oh, can you give me some cigarettes?" And so I started looking for cigarettes, but then she said, "Oh, no, that's not this is not obedient. This is not the way to be Christian. No, I gotta talk to your priest about this. This is not right." So anyway, so I realized that there is a time to be obedient and a time not to be. Of course, you don't. So the concept is that you don't obey someone that's asking you to do something that's harmful. Oh, by the way, someone has their microphone not muted. Is it you, Theodoros? Maybe mute that microphone. And so and Saint Basil also talked about this, how if someone asks you to do something that's contrary to the commandments of Christ, then what you need to do is disobey him and say it's better to obey God than men. Right. So, any comments on that or not? Yes.
The only thing I think it falls, for those of us who are not monastics, maybe under spiritual father, right? A guide.
Oh, yes.
Otherwise, I think I'll speak for myself. Oh, do I obey this? Do I not obey that? Do I obey this? I'm talking about, high level spiritual things, like spiritual things, not, do I get the green card or red card? I feel like then I need guidance. Otherwise, my mind could just put me, yeah, maybe that's true, or maybe. I feel like the bottom line boils down to having a good thought.
Yeah.
Help you guide us in these.
Yeah. Were you able to hear that online? What she said? No. Okay. Let me just sort of.
No.
Sorry, you're far away. Yeah. So what she was saying is that it's so crucial to have a spiritual father, because by having a spiritual father, you can get guidance and you can be obeying and cutting off your will, and you can be very much on the sure path. And this is something that many of the Holy Fathers would emphasize. And in fact, they even have a joke. They say, if you don't have a spiritual father, sell everything you have and go buy one. They say. So, because when we have a spiritual father, we're on the safe path, and we're able to simply ask our spiritual father whenever there is a dilemma and obey him. And even if the spiritual father isn't some God-bearing elder, just the very fact that we are cutting off our will and being obedient is something that God will give grace to and bless. And so it's a very safe path. Whereas when we try to, there's a saying, woe to him who is alone, and another saying of the Holy Fathers, a person who is guiding himself is his own enemy. So yeah, so it's very, very important to have a spiritual father. And so if you don't already have one, I hope you do. Well, you don't have to sell everything you have, but just try to find one, because that'll make a huge difference. So, any other comments? Should I move on to? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
It's like, forgive me, it's not a question, but talk about
Say a little louder.
When we talk about the monasticism, people don't go to the monastery, looks like it by what you said, don't go to the monastery to rest from the world, but is doing all the right things to rest from oneself.
Yeah, do you hear that? No. Yeah, so people will go to the monastery, she's saying, not to have rest from the world, not to have, but to have rest from one's own self. In other words, to be freed from one's own passionate desires. Yeah, and so that's ideally the way people would join the monastery. They would come with a sense of, hey, this is something I want to. I need to come closer to God, and this is a path that will make it easier for me because I'm not only do I have the guidance of the monastery, but I'm also surrounded by people who are of a like mind. So yes, that's really true.
Who said that?
But then of course there are plenty of people that would join a monastery for a wrong reason. I mean, they might say, "Oh, I just broke up with my girlfriend. Well, I forget about the world. I'll just join a monastery." And which, I mean, it can work out for the best sometimes. I mean, there are people who join the monastery for the wrong reason and then actually do very well. But it's not common, but it can happen. Okay, so now I'm going to continue on page 36, section 12, where Christ is talking about the difference between commandments, which are for everybody, and then gifts that we give to God as up and above and beyond. So he says that living in virginity and in poverty, these are not commandments. No, Christ didn't say you have to be poor or you can't get married. But he did say to some specific people, if you want to be perfect, then sell everything you have and follow me. So that kind of thing. And so this idea of doing beyond above and beyond what Christ commands, this has to do very much with the motivation for why we would obey the commandments of Christ. Because some people would obey the commandments just out of a sense of obligation. They said, well, that's just the way it is, I have to do it. Whereas a much more beautiful way would be to be motivated out of love for God and saying, well, I want to please God. I owe it to him. And there's a very beautiful incident in the life of Saint Paisius of the Holy Mount when he was very young, that illustrates the power of doing something out of love for God. Because when St. Paisius was just a kid, there was an older kid who in his village who said to him, oh, all this stuff about God, that's all baloney, it's just all made up stuff, because what scientists have proven is that evolution is actually where we all came from. And so this is not the kind of thing you need to believe anymore. And so when St. Paisius heard this, he was very disturbed. He was like, oh no, wait a second. Maybe God's not really there. Maybe I'm just wasting my time praying. And so he said, I know, I'll do an experiment. I'm going to go out to this cave nearby. I'm going to go there all day and pray for hours and hours. And I'm going to ask God to show himself to me. And then if he shows himself to me, then I'll know he's there. And if he doesn't, well, then I'll know he's not there. So he went out to the cave and started praying and doing prostrations and hours and hours and fasting and everything. And after all this, God didn't appear to him. So so he started to worry. But then he had a beautiful thought. He thought to himself, well, if all these things that they say about Christ in the Gospels are true, that he was such a good person, so kind, so compassionate, so everything, he deserves my service. He deserves my obedience because he was such a good person. So I'm gonna obey his commandments just because he was such a good person. And then at that very moment, Christ appeared to him in glory and said, I am the direction, the way, and the life. And so this is a very good lesson. By the way, someone's microphone is on. Please mute your. So this is a very good lesson to show that the way to connect with God, really in a more powerful way, is through this sense of love, wanting to connect with the person, wanting to connect with God. Okay. So,
Well,
yes.
As a short note comment, like I heard something yesterday in TV. I was listening to the priest who was doing some comments.
Yeah.
And this was two friends, or like I said, couples, so they were not eating meats, cheese, or whatever. I can't hold it anymore. I'm gonna break my fast. I'm gonna eat olive oil today.
Yeah.
And the other person, no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna eat olive oil. And they were arguing. Hey, is it right? Is it wrong? If I eat olive oil, what happened? And that conversation there, the Panaya appear in front of them and say, what happened, guys? Why were you arguing? Say, you know what? I want to break the fast and I'm sinner, I want to eat olive oil. So the Panaya say, there's nothing wrong with that. If you cannot hold it for 40 days, you still are blessed. Doesn't mean because we eat olive oil, there's nothing wrong. The other guy said, no, I want to keep it because I want to do 40 days straight. Now, you know, if you do that one, I own you. I own you, σου χρωστάω favor, είπε η Παναγία σε αυτόν.
Oh, okay.
Και το αποτέλεσμα...
I owe you. So the Panaya said that if you do this extra fast, I owe you one.
It doesn't mean the other guy break the fast and was a bad person, but it's better να χρωστάμε στην Παναγία favors what we bring the favor on us and breaking the fast. Common thing I've to say one above the hand, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
One extra step.
Say in Greek.
Oh.
I think the
yeah. You know, I think.
Understood me.
Yeah. No, I got it. Were you able to hear that, or is it too quiet? No.
It was a little muffled, Father.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about this. Yeah. I gotta get a better system here going. But anyway, I'll just tell you. So there are these two people who are trying to fast for a long time, and one of them started losing as an extra sort of fast. It wasn't something part of the church rules fasting, and one of them halfway through was not able to finish the fast. But then the Panaya appeared to them and said, you know, you can if you want, because you don't have to fast this extra time for me, but if you do, I'll receive it as a gift. And so it's the same idea where, you know, we can make sacrifices for God. And this is something that Elder Joseph did very many times. St. Joseph Hesychast, he would many times do these extra Lents. Like, you know, there's Great Lent that lasts, you know, for the 40 days of fasting before Pascha and before the Nativity.
Extra day one, you know, you cannot forget 40 days, you can do 41 days or 42 days, for example, fast, and this is extra one.
Yeah, and so what St. Joseph would do, though, he would say, just like in the middle of, let's say, I don't know, July, he'd say, hey, you know, I'm going to fast for 40 days. And then he'd do these 40-day fasts. And the amazing thing was that every time at the end of these 40 days, he would get some special grace from God, and he'd just get some sort of vision or some sort of, you know, supernatural thing happening to him. And there's sort of a cute story that we didn't put into the actual published book about one time that he messed up. Well, he didn't mess up, but what happened was, so at the end of one of his extra 40-day fasts, in his vigil at night, he saw out in the cliffs there was a light. And because of his previous experiences with, you know, all kinds of angels and supernatural things happening, he was thinking, oh, this, who knows, this might be an angel or some saint, something coming, because it was the end of his 40-day fast, his extra fast. And so because he was living with Elder Arsenios at the time, and he wanted Elder Arsenios also to enjoy this, to have this vision, whatever it was. So he called out to Father Arsenios, hey, Father Arsenios, come quickly, I want to show you something. And then he heard a voice calling out in the distance, because at night he wasn't sure where he was. He says, okay, I'm coming. But when St. Joseph heard this voice, okay, I'm coming, he noticed that it was coming from the same place where that light was. So, that's strange, because there's time for like prayer in the middle of the night. So then slowly this light was getting closer and closer, and St. Joseph was getting worried that Father Arsenios wouldn't come there in time. So he said, Claudine, come on, hurry up. Don't be late. Come quickly, Father Arsenios. And again, he heard a voice replying, okay, I'm on my way. But again, it was from pretty much where that light was. So he sort of scratching his head, what's going on? And so finally, the light gets closer and closer, and then it turns out it was Father Arsenio's holding a lamp. And so then St. Joseph said to him, "Hey, what are you doing with a lamp out in the middle of the night, out in the cliffs?" And then Father Arsenio says, "Oh, I'm looking for snails so we can boil them, have something to eat tomorrow. Do you want something?" And then St. Joseph says, "Yeah, I want to boil you in your lamp." He got fooled. Yeah. So anyway, but that just he was doing these extra fasts because he would get all this extra grace because of these gifts, as it were, to God. Okay.
May I comment something, please?
Sure. Yes.
Because this discussion reminded me of a book and of intellectual, a Romanian intellectual actually
Yeah.
that you may have heard of. His name is Nicolae Steinhardt.
Yes.
He was Israeli person living in Romania. Because he was in an intellectual, he was thrown into the communist prison by the communist regime. In the prison, he got baptized into the Orthodox Christian faith.
Yes.
After he got out of the prison, he became a monk, but continued his writings and intellectual
Yes.
endeavors. Anyway, in his most important book, which is called The Diary of Happiness, which contains extracts from what his memories from the prison,
Yes.
from the communist prison, he says something like this. I'm paraphrasing. He says something like, there are some reasons why we abstain from sin or try to get close to God. The first reason and the lowest stage is fear.
Oh,
because
can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
You're giving away the
No.
what's going to come later in the book.
I'm sorry.
I was very tempted to say exactly what you're saying about these three
Okay.
versions of, but I want you to give it away because it's coming up later in the book. So.
I didn't know. I didn't.
Oh yeah. So sorry interrupting you, but so there is, but there. So just as a sneak preview, there are three categories of people who are doing something good, and I'm not going to tell you what they are just yet because it's coming up later in the book, and so we'll talk about that next time when we get to that chapter. Sorry for cutting you off, Claudia.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, please.
How do you avoid doing these extra gifts for God and making it transactional? You know, like you're doing this and expecting something in return. I don't think that's the point.
I guess maybe I shouldn't cut you off, Claudia, because now everyone wants to know about this. So I'll be the spoiler. Okay. Yeah. So I'll tell you what I think you're gonna say, and what Saint Abba Dorotheus talks about, and also talks about what you just asked just now. So what Abba Dorotheus says, he says that according to Saint Basil the Great, there are three categories of people that are pleasing to God. And the first category is when you're doing something, as you're saying, Claudia, out of fear. You're gonna obey the rules of fasting, for example, because you don't want to sin and then lose grace and eventually lose your soul if you continue doing worse sins. So that's the second category of people pleasing to God, is where you're doing it for a recompense, where you're doing it for a reward. So you're thinking, oh well, if I keep the fast up until Pascha, I'll get a lot of grace from God, and it'll be, so that's where you're doing it for reward. Then the third category is where you're doing it out of a sense of love for God. And this is a very different kind of motivation, because this is basically this is intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. The first two categories, where you're avoiding punishment or you're doing it for a reward, this is extrinsic. It's you're not doing it for the goodness of the thing itself. You're doing it because there's some sort of punishment or reward attached to it. And this is okay. St. Basil says that this is something that's still acceptable by God, but it's something that's immature, it's incomplete, and it's also something that is sort of fragile because it's not we can't do it wholeheartedly, because if for some reason we lose this sense of the reward or the punishment, well, then we'll stop doing what's good. Whereas when we're doing something sheerly out of love for God, well, then it's very solid and it's very secure. And so St. Basil and Abba Dorotheus say that this corresponds to three states. The first is like a slave, the second is a servant, and the third is a son or daughter. And so obviously the last stage of being a son or daughter is the most beautiful. And this is something that St. Pius of Holy Mountain had very much in himself. This idea of doing things out of love for God, but because he said something very moving about himself. He said, if at some point an angel were to come down from heaven and to tell me, oh, we're really sorry, Father Paisios, heaven is full and there's no more room for anybody in heaven. So no point in all your ascetical struggles. No point in keep doing it because you're going to go to hell anyway. So St. Pius said, even if an angel were to really tell me this, and of course if it really were an angel, not some demon, St. Pius said that I'd still be doing my fasting and my struggles and everything, because it would be something. The reason I'm doing all my fasting and my praying and following the commandments, it's not because I want a reward, or it's not because I just feel I have to, but I know that doing these things is pleasing to God. It's my gift to God. And so I have so much joy in doing this for God that I wouldn't stop doing it. And so that's something that always touched me very much, to see how, wow, that there can be people that have so much love for God that they don't even care about going to heaven. They just want to please God with the things that they're doing and saying and thinking. Yes.
That's like the story from St. Porphyrius, where he says, you can do anything with me that you want to, Lord. You can put me in hell, just don't cut me off from your love.
Yeah. Did you hear that? Yeah. Oh, good. Okay.
Father Ephraim,
Yes.
can I ask one quick question?
Oh, sure. Of course. Yeah.
So on the three categories that we actually seem that we please God, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
Okay, so you said it's out of being a slave or a servant, and then out of being a son or daughter. Couldn't we, as parents, because we're not in the situation of being in a monastery, naimaste monachik and monaches, like, can we see that in the relationship between our children, how they see us? They see us as like they're like sometimes we're like their tyrants, like they're like our slaves, and then sometimes they're doing out of fear, and then they obey because they have to serve us because we are older, or then and then the best part is being as a daughter and a son, where they're doing it from from their heart. Like, can we compare that as a parent and a child?
Yeah, and that's I would say that's very crucial. And I mean, to inspire your children to be motivated, not because they're going to get spanked, or not because they're going to be praised or whatever, get rewards or extra, but because that's out of love. And that's something that's very difficult, I'm guessing. I mean, obviously I've never raised kids, but if there's some way that you can encourage them to show others, to share with them how much joy you have and gratitude you have for their obedience or whatever it is that they're doing good, that will I'm guessing that will help inspire them to be more motivated out of love. And I don't know, does any of you, maybe any of you who have raised kids, have any of you found something specific that does encourage your children to be this third category, where they're motivated out of love to do something? Yes.
I found that the more you correct yourself as a mom or dad, God helps the kids, and they become better children because you become a better parent. But
Yeah. Did you hear that?
Maybe also.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, she said the more we as parents correct ourselves, the more then this inspires children also to be more loving. Yes.
Or if they can see that you truly sacrificed yourself for them.
Oh, okay. Or if you see that you've truly sacrificed, then that's also something that inspires them to love. Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
Or you can say, one icon and 1,000 awards, you know? If you do are a good example for them, you don't have to explain. When I get feel it, but I can understand better. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, he said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and your example, what they see in you, is going to really affect them, and so you can gain their love by becoming a person that's trustworthy and virtuous.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Πάτερ μου. Ευχαριστώ.
You're welcome, Parakallah. Yeah. Oh, Christo's taking the credit for that one, he said. Okay. So moving on a little now with so now page 39. This is he gets the part where he's talking about the monastic garb and what it is that we wear as monks, and how there's all this symbolism behind it. And just because it might not be very clear what exactly he's talking about, I thought I'd just bring with me sort of like a show and tell what some of these things are. So I don't know how well you can see this on the screen. So this is what they call in modern Greek they call this the analavos. Sorry, they call it the schema in modern Greek, but it's the analavos. And you just put it on like this. And so this is the schema. And then there's this thing called the polystavrion. And this is, it's called a polystavrion for the obvious reason that poly means many and stavros is cross. And so it had all these little crosses woven into it. I don't know if you can see that. As you just stick it over your shoulder like this, and then like that. Yeah, and so that just sort of holds it all together. And then they talk about the cowl. So first you have this scufi here. There's just a hat. So you wear that like this, and then the cowl is this thing right here. It's just this here, just this piece of cloth that just sort of hangs on. You've probably already seen all these, at least the cowl before. A lot of people wear that, in like bishops and archimandrites. Yeah, so this is what the cowl is. So I just thought I'd show you guys these things. But then they mentioned some other things there, like they talk about this colovion. That's it. They talk about a colovion that doesn't actually exist anymore. That we don't nowadays. Monks don't wear a colovion anymore. We have just the outer raso that we wear during church, but we don't have a colovion anymore. So apparently the garments have sort of developed over time, and they're not the same exactly as they used to be. In fact, it's very interesting. In the very old days, in the beginning in third, 4th century Egypt, the monks, they didn't even wear black. They would wear all white. And not only that, but they'd have their heads completely shaven. And not only the monks had their heads shaven, but even the nuns did too. So oops, I just covered up this camera. Yeah, so it was a very different kind of situation back in the old days. But then things gradually evolved, and they found that the color black would be more suitable for repentance and mourning, and so that's why it prevailed, having a black clothing. Sure.
Two questions, and thank you, because I've actually never seen it like that.
Oh yeah.
The schema thing.
Yeah.
Is that on the Velo schema, or is that just a schema? Like when you're tantra or monk, do you get? I thought you don't get a schema right away. Like there's a time.
Yeah.
Or is there a difference between a regular schema versus a Velo schema?
Yeah. Could you guys you hear that? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So there are different levels in monastic. Well, I guess levels. Yeah, that's probably the best word. So usually, what happens is when a person goes to a monastery, once they decide they want to stay there and try it out, they become a novice, dokimos. And in most monasteries, a dokimos will be given black clothes like this, like a long thing, a robe kind of thing, in this kondo they call it. But they won't be given the cowl, and they won't be given a rason, and they won't be given a schema or anything. And then after a couple of years, minimum 1 year, but sometimes 3 years, or sometimes even more than that. But after a couple of years, then a person will be, if a person decides they want to become a monk, then they'll become tonsured. But most places they'll tonsure you first as what they call a rasoforos, which means that they will get their name changed, and they will give them the cowl and the robe, but they won't be given the schema. And so this is sort of like the first stage of monasticism. And so typically a person will be a rasoforos monk, a rasofor monk or nun for, in Elder Ephraim's monasteries, you'd be typically 20 or 30 or maybe even 40 years a rasofor monk or nun before you're given the great schema. And then there is also something called the small schema, which is, it's actually it's almost the same thing as the great schema. It's sort of like a stepping stone to the great schema, but it's something that was actually not really spoken well of by some of the Holy Fathers. They say that they really shouldn't have broken down the great schema into the small and great schema, because originally there was just the schema and that's it. And but there are some monasteries where instead of making you go from novice to rasofor to great schema, they'll make you from novice directly to the great schema. But when those monasteries, you'd be a novice from like 10 years maybe. So yeah, so there are different stages like that.
Well, the schema you get buried too.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, so when I'm buried, they're gonna put this in the grave with me. Yeah. Yeah, I can take it with me. No, yeah, that's how they do it. Yeah. And the great schema is something we wear all the time. In fact, hiding under what I have, I'll show you this underneath my shirt here, because I don't want to wear that big schema thing on. So I have this mini version of the schema here under my thing here. So yeah, so this, because the Russians, they have a different strategy though. The Russian great schema monks, they don't have this mini version. They always have to wear the big version, and their version, if you see it, it's much bigger than just this thing that just drapes over your shoulders. This huge thing. It has a hood and everything, and so there are different traditions in that. Yes.
My question is, when I go to a monastery, so I really cannot tell who I should kiss their hand.
Yeah.
If they are just.
Yeah, so she's saying that when she goes to a monastery, she doesn't know whose hand to kiss, because you don't know who's a priest and who's not a priest, because the monks and the priest monks are all wearing the same things, and so anyway, it's and there isn't really any way you can tell until you get to know them. But there, in Greek monasteries at least, there is you can tell by their names sometimes, because on Mount Athos and in Elder Ephraim's monasteries, they would call a regular monk a pater Ephraim, for example. But then if he's a priest monk, it'd be called Papa Ephraim. So that's actually why people call me Papa Ephraim, not just Pater Ephraim. And so the same applies to any priest monk in a monastery.
I didn't quite catch that.
So a monk who is just a monk and not ordained a priest, he'll be called Pater, father, whatever, so and so. But then once he becomes also a priest, then they call him Papa. So yeah, okay. So maybe yeah, please.
Double part of it. The polistavrio thing, I've never seen.
Polistavrio, yeah.
The polistavrio, that's when that's something you wear only during service?
Yeah, so this is put on top of the great schema. So you only get this when you have the schema. And yeah, we in the Greek tradition, we only wear this during the services. Oh, we make this the last one just because it's already, an hour is already up. This the last one.
What are those paters you send them on? Doesn't let you kiss the hands? Why?
Yeah, so the question is why don't monks let you kiss their hand? And the idea is that, well, a priest should let you kiss his hand, because you're kissing really Christ through the priest. Because when the Christ blesses and he puts his hand like this, he's actually making the letters iota sigma sigma, which is Jesus Christos. So the idea is you're really blessing, you're really kissing Christ, and not so much the priest himself. Whereas a monk is not allowed to make a priestly blessing like this, and so you don't really kiss the. But it's true though. There are times when a monk would just let you kiss his hand. Like I noticed when I went to St. Paisius of the Holy Mountain, I noticed that some people tried to grab his hand and kiss it, and he'd pull it away. But then when it was my turn to kiss, I sort of just meekly sort of, can I kiss your hand? And he let me. so I guess it depends on. So we better stop there just because we said it'd be an hour and it's already an hour. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see you next week as well. So through the prayers of our Holy Fathers and of Abba Dorotheus, Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us. Amen. Okay, goodbye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we're reading chapter 2 on humility.